Welcome back. Now, in a moment, we'll examine the legacy of civil wars in Africa. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Venezuela's president has compared opposition protesters to Daesh after a pro-government supporter was stabbed and set on fire in the capital, Caracas. The 21-year-old man is now being treated in hospital for serious burns. At least 24 people have been wounded after a bomb exploded in the Thai capital, Bangkok. The blast happened at the Phra Mongkut Klau Hospital, which is used by soldiers and retired military officers. Still not clear who was responsible for the attack. And hundreds of Syrian rebels and their families have left the last opposition-held district in the city of Homs. Around 700 fighters were bussed out of the city, which is now fully under the control of Syria's Bashar al-Assad for the first time since the conflict began. So back to our main topic. Earlier in the programme, we talked about Nigeria's civil war 50 years ago. Well, Africa has been scarred by numerous similar tribal or ethnic conflicts, both in the past and today. Insight's Juliana Oleinka explains.
A number of regional clashes, as well as political, religious and ethnically based wars, have kept much of Africa extremely unstable. The long-running dispute between the Tutsi and Hutu groups within the Rwandan population led to the mass murder of the minority Tutsis and all moderate Hutus. Starting in April 1994, between 800,000 and 1 million people were killed in just 100 days. Virtually the entire world turned away and did nothing to stop the genocide. The civil war in Rwanda has been described as the darkest and most brutal tragedy in modern African history. The largest source of casualties in recent years has been the result of the Boko Haram insurgency in the north of Nigeria. Since 2009, an estimated 20,000 people have been killed by the terror group. What started in Nigeria has now spread into Chad, Cameroon and Niger. The Somali civil war has been ongoing since 1991. The conflict has seen up to 500,000 casualties as multiple warlords battle for control of the country. Central government only appeared in Somalia in 2012, and the state is still seen as extremely unstable. This has made the country a home base for a number of terror groups. A lack of leadership has also seen a rampant increase in piracy, drought and famine. A power vacuum following the death of Muammar Gaddafi has led to the country's second civil war. Daesh controls a small amount of territory in the north of Libya, and more than 4,000 people have been killed in the past 2 years. In 2003, anti-government rebel groups attempted a failed coup, which led authorities to initiate a genocide against its non-Arab citizens. The Sudan conflict now involves several actors. There are estimates that over 300,000 people have been killed, with up to 3 million people being displaced. Similar conflicts and insurgencies are still ongoing in Egypt, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Algeria, Tunisia, Burundi and Mali.
Well, still with us here in the studio is Ludovica Iacchino, who's an international news reporter at International Business Times UK, and Philip Idiowo, who is the UK chairman for the political party in Nigeria, the All Progressive Congress. Welcome back to both of you.
Thank you.
Ludovica, I mean, most of Africa's problems with tribal divisions can be laid at the door of arbitrary post-colonial borders drawn up by European powers. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I do agree with that. If you look at what has been happening also recently, you know, we always often, let's say, comes down to colonization. And if we take, for example, the Rwanda genocide was mentioned, for example, the colonization played a part in it, as well as there are certain. For example, if we take into account what's happening in South Sudan, for example, it's complicated. Sometimes it's not just tribal wars. It's very simplistic to label things as just tribalistic wars, but it does play a factor sometimes. And the Biafra war as well. You know, there's people who have been claimed that the problem started when there was so-called amalgamation contract, when the Northern Protectorate was unified with the Southern Protectorate during British colonization. And so I think it does play a factor.
But the end result is that across Africa you've got these different ethnicities, different religions, different tribes all crammed together. Why have African leaders been so reluctant to redraw these borders?
Well, I think first of all, the challenges of a post-colonial continent, they are massive. Africa is particularly in a fix because when we talk about colonialism, people tend to look to Europe only, but really that is not the case. Africa has suffered the scourge of Arab colonialism as well as European colonialism. So you have two toxic mix, of elements. You have the element of tribe as well as the element of religion. These two mixing together in the arena of politics is what is making Africa so unstable. And these two are coming from two different cultures, Europe and the Middle East. That is the challenge that Africa faces. Now, how do you deal with these? This is the problem.
And that's the million-dollar question, because we've ended up with conflicts and quite catastrophic end results, like the Rwandan genocide and the civil wars in Chad, Angola, Sudan. We're seeing conflict in South Sudan. It does seem to be an insurmountable problem.
Yeah.
I think what sometimes we fail to understand is that these are also relatively new countries. I mean, most of them gained independence in the 1960s, so they're still trying to adjust to new realities and to understand that leaders need to understand that their own way, their African way. They have to build their own history. So I think they're new countries, and they have a legacy. So I think although it's horrific, I think it's also quite understandable why certain conflicts are still in place in some territories across Africa. These are countries that are new, are countries that are still struggling with the legacy of colonization and of ethnic and religious group forced to live together. It takes time.
But, I mean, what can African governments do about this? When you look at these kind of conflicts, the former president of Kenya, Daniel Arap Moi, described tribalism as a quote, a cancer, the foundation of all evil. So clearly it's recognised as a massive problem. But is there a political will to do more about this?
I would say that in some cases, yes. You mentioned Kenya. I think Kenya has taken a lead in this regard. Kenya, they have been able to sit down and they had a constitutional conference, a couple of years ago, and they fashioned a new constitution, but that was post that very violent incidents that happened after their election. And I think that is what is needed, to deal with the challenges that African countries in this modern time faces, because these countries were coupled together from countries that were in existence. And I'll give you an example. Benin Empire was an existing empire. That is where I come from. They have their own form of government. They had everything going for them, but they were forced, to begin to live together with strange policies, government styles that they are not aware of, they don't know anything about. My ancestors had their own form of government. It was working very well for them. For centuries, they were ruling themselves. And that is a challenge. It is not the fact that African people didn't have some form of government. They had their forms of government that was working for them. Now, it is the destabilization of these forms of government that they had that is intensifying the problems they are having.
Problems that are already existing.
That idea. And so, how do you deal with this? How do we move African countries into the modern democracies of the West? Because really that is what...
and that is key, because all these conflicts and the civil wars, across Africa have very much damaged Africa's potential.
Absolutely.
Its political advancement, its economy, and continue to do so.
Yes, absolutely. It's true. I mean, Africa really is the richest continent, and it has so much potential. And, violence is really, it's creating also we're witnessing one of the worst refugee crises at the moment, and most of them, like if you look at what's happening in South Sudan, for example, the UN labeled it as the worst refugee crisis ongoing in Africa at the moment, and you have millions of people every month, hundreds of thousands fleeing to other countries in Africa that are already struggling with the economy. They have internal problems. So I think, yes, all these wars are damaging.
Do you think we're going to see a growing trend of secessionist movements pushing for more self-determination?
I think it depends on if ongoing secessionist movements are successful. I think then they can set a trend. If a movement calling for independence is going to be suppressed with violence, I think other people will think twice.
But I mean, I think that it's not, suppressing these secessional movements by violence. I don't think that would be the solution, because it will only get people more angry. I think that there is a need for the international community to take a deep breath and say, how do we deal with this? Again, I like to move to the area of Ethiopia. During the Ethiopia-Eritrean War, the UN had to step in, and they helped to broker some kind of peace.
Right.
Yes, they separated, but it became a peaceful separation. Right? And I think that is what we need to do.
So there is an example.
Yes.
I want to say a big thank you to both of you today. That's been a really interesting and deep discussion. Ludovica and Philip there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sulie. Thank you.
Well, we end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. It was called The Greatest Show on Earth, and now, after nearly 150 years, the cast of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus have taken their final bow in New York. The circus was created in the 1800s by Phineas Taylor Barnum, who was one of the first circus owners to move his circus across the country by train. More than 250 million people have been to see Ringling's shows over the years, but animal rights groups say the circus's long-standing resistance to demands that it stop using animals resulted in a drop in crowd numbers. Well, that's all for now. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and that was Insight.